Hi, I'm Vicky. I'm glad you're here. Today I'm going to be making a painting with this background in it. So this is a waratah that I painted just recently, and I used Daniel Smith paints and Winsor & Newton professional paints, and it's painted on Arches Aquarelle 300 GSM or 140 pound cold pressed paper. And I'm going to take a sheet of that and I'm going to make some cards today. So I have these die cuts, which I purchased from Amazon. 6 pieces words metal die cuts for card making, embossing stencil template molds. Interesting. You might be able to make a stencil with these too, so I'll look into that later as well. If I can make some stencils, that'll be great. But for now, I'm going to use these die cuts, and I'm going to be using note card size. So these are the Stampin' Up! Note card size envelopes. For landscape or portrait, they should work. And all I really want to do is create this background. Now to create it, what I did was I used Payne's Grey from Winsor & Newton professional paints, and I added salt. You can see it all around here, how the background has created this incredible texture. Now with salt, it's really hard to replicate something again. I'm going to give it the best shot I can, but I'm going to use different colours. I will use a Payne's Grey as well because it does granulate so beautifully. But I'm going to be using some of my other Daniel Smith colours that come in my 24 palette. So this is the 24 half pans of Daniel Smith paints. So the granulating colours in this are Raw Umber, Jane's Grey, Burnt Umber, Burnt Sienna, Yellow Ochre, Goethite Brown Ochre, Indian Red, Quinacridone Burnt Orange, Undersea Green, Sap Green, Cerulean Blue, Cobalt Turquoise, Ultramarine Blue, Quinacridone Gold, and Buff Titanium. So I have a whole stack of colours that will granulate, and I hope that will help the salt activate. Now the salt that I used was simply some rock salt that I bought from the supermarket that I use in my salt grinder, and some mold-on salt flakes. And I have some paint on that where I've been painting with it, but anyway, these are salt flakes, so I used both sorts of salt to create this effect here. And you can see particularly on the edges how it just makes this beautiful pattern. Really, really nice, and it works very well on the Arches cold press 300 GSM paper. So the first thing I want to do is cut down my cards, and then I need to cut out my die cuts with watercolor paper, but I'm not going to use this beautiful expensive Arches watercolor paper for the die cuts. What I want is some cheap and cheerful watercolor paper that is the same weight and the same color, and it has a bit of texture in it. So this watercolor pad from Renault Art, I bought from the dollar store, and I really don't like it for anything other than maybe doing a bit of swatching on, or I really don't like painting on it. So because this is for die cuts, I can take a piece of this, have a look and see that it's a really close match. It's very similar to the Arches paper. It's a little bit lighter, but it has a really good texture for die cutting. Can you see that? It's quite interesting. So it has a rough texture. It's 300 GSM weight. I'm going to use this for my die cut pieces and save my Arches paper for my painting. So let's get started with our cutting. So these are our measurements. Right, I want a nice little border around my card. Between 1/4 and 1/8 of an inch. So those borders seem to work quite nicely on cards. It's not too big, not too small. So if you didn't have a glass cutting mat, as I do. You could use an A3 size pad. You could use the backing on that, and that would be fine. I have a Famui mop brush. Any large wash brush would do for this. I'm waking up the paper with a spritz of water. I've already prepped my palette by spritzing it too. I've got my salt in some dishes, which will make it easier to put on the final pieces. So let's get painting. So I'm going to start with my Winsor & Newton Payne's Grey. And I want my brush quite wet, and I want plenty of pigment on here because watercolour always dries lighter. So to get a nice coverage, I want to make sure there's a lot of pigment in my brush as well as some water. Now I'm using Indian Red from Daniel Smith, and I'll be using my Daniel Smith paints from here on in. So I'm covering the white areas first, and it's okay if this touches the second colour, but I'm just allowing it to touch. I'm not mixing the colours together. Now I'm going to do the next card with quinacridone burnt orange and cerulean blue chromium. So I'll start with the quin burnt orange. This time I'm having a couple of stripes going horizontally across, whereas the first one I sort of had a diagonal kind of shape. I want each of the cards to have a different pattern on it, so I'm aiming for different direction of lines or shapes or thicknesses of lines. So here's the cerulean blue chromium. I'm going to pop on some music, and I'll catch you back when we get to the next stage.
Now I've used both sorts of salts. I'm going to put them out in the sun to dry. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to get on with making the die cuts. So I have the watercolor paper here, and I'm just using the same tape that I used to tape the cards to the glass to stop the dies from moving around when they go into the machine. And I'm actually putting it on that textured side of the paper. And I have a big shot die cutting machine. So I'm doing that with the other 3 dies. And I'm going to run them through the machine and cut them. Now, because this is quite heavy paper, it is 300 GSM, so much heavier than regular cardstock. So I'm going to run it back and forwards a few times just to ensure that it does cut.
So they're now completely dry, and I've just brushed off all of the salt. They look fabulous. I just love how they've turned out. Now let's reveal what's under the tape. I really love playing with the granulating colours in the Daniel Smith range. And out of the 24 set, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 of the 24 are granulating. So that was a lot of different colours to play with. I just love these. I absolutely love how they turned out. And this one has Payne's Grey from Winsor & Newton Professional Colours. The rest are Daniel Smith. This was with Daniel Smith Indian Red. It's just gorgeous. I do like the Winsor & Newton Payne's Grey. It's a little bit bluer than the Daniel Smith Grey, and it does have a good reputation of being a great all-rounder. I use it in a lot of my pieces. It's given us a nice shaggy edge there too, which is kind of cool. We still have a border. This is definitely the most dramatic. We've still got a border, but we've got a shaggy edge, which is kind of cool. These others have more of a neat border and a neat edge. Well, all the borders are pretty good so far. Let's have a look at this one. Wow. Isn't that just beautiful? Absolutely gorgeous. Just rock salt and salt flakes. The salt flakes were mold-on salt flakes. They seem to work quite well because they're flatter. And then the rock salt, because it's that little rock shape, that gives a different kind of an impression. Wow, this one's another favourite. It's pretty spectacular. Look at that. In fact, I think that is actually my favourite. It's broken into some blues in there as well. So the blue in that, I think I used undersea green. The blue in that is just broken through beautifully. There's a few little bits of salt left. Wow. So, you know, you end up with this great little card to send to somebody. But I'm not finished with the cards yet. I'm actually going to put the die cuts on the top of them. That's the final piece of the puzzle. But there are a lot of other ways you could decorate these. You could just do some calligraphy over the top of them. If you have some nice neat calligraphy or good handwriting, you could just write over the top. That's lovely. Look at that. And the strength in these pigments is gorgeous. Daniel Smith are well known for their highly pigmented colours. And I find the Winsor & Newton Professional Colours are very nice paints to work with as well. This one reminds me of the seashore with the sand and the water. Very nice. And that lovely wavy top, it almost looks like waves. That is beautiful. And this one, I was a bit concerned the green was walking too far into the buff titanium. So this is sap green and buff titanium, yes. And I added some more buff titanium into the mix because the green was overtaking it, and that slowed down the progress of the green and ended with something that looks really, really nice. I love that too. Wow, they are just stunning. So my plan now is to put the die cuts on the top. So for that, I have some liquid glue, which is a fine tip glue from Stampin' Up. And I have my honeybee tweezers, which are really good for this sort of detailing. So now it's time to put the finishing details onto these beautiful cards. And I just wanted to show you how much room you have to fit them into the envelopes. So these are the note card envelopes from Stampin' Up. You see they fit in perfectly. So I'm going to bring my die cuts in now. So let's get these adhered to the front panels. I think this would look nice landscape. Oh, I do like that. That looks great. So I have a couple of tissues. I'm going to set my die cut on. And my fine tip glue from Stampin' Up. And less is more because this dries shiny, so you don't want it coming out on front of your die cuts, and then that spoils the whole piece. So I find the best thing to do is to use tweezers and just add glue to some of your die cut, not all of it. So just where the thicker pieces are. And the edges, little edges like that, you don't want them under adhered or they will spoil the card at the end. Just tiny, tiny dobs of fine tip glue. Tiniest dobs. Now you do need something like fine tip glue. I could have used Tombow multi-adhesive, would also work. It's just too hard to apply it in any way that is thick. So I can see I've got a blob there. I just want to get rid of some of that so it doesn't smoosh out and look like a shiny piece on the card. My cards are now perfectly dry. They've been sitting out in the sun for a while. All of the salt has been brushed off, and I'm just touching this very lightly to the edges. It's only a very, very small amount of this glue. I'm sitting nice and close to where the camera is so that I can see where the glue's going. Okay. A little bit of salt there still. Just going to check. There's no salt under it. And I've got my tissue ready. And I'm going to sit that on there for a minute. And I'm going to grab a weight. Set a weight on it. I have an acrylic block for that. That's going up here. Now I'm going to do a couple more landscape size. So these stripes are going that way. I think I'll leave that for a portrait card. This one, I like this idea at the top here. So this will be portrait as well. This looks quite interesting here. I do like the look of that one in landscape. Although, that is very dramatic, that one. Now I think I'll use that one in landscape. This one, I think I'll go portrait. Yes. And then the sympathy on this one. Okay, so I've got it all figured out what I'm going to be doing. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, consider doing so. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you again next time. Bye for now.